Welcome to Ghostlore Chronicles, the channel where we dive deep into the world's darkest legends, haunted tales, and chilling mysteries. Tonight's story takes us to Niagara Falls, into a tunnel where, at midnight, the scream of a child still echoes through the stone walls. Locals say it isn't just an echo, it's the cry of a restless spirit. So turn off the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself, because this is the terrifying tale of the Screaming Tunnel. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I never believed in ghosts. Not really. I grew up in Chicago, a city buzzing with life, traffic, and stories that belonged more in barroom chatter than in real life. Sure, I'd heard the legends. Every neighborhood has its haunted house. Every subway tunnel has some half-forgotten tale of someone who vanished and never came back. But those were just stories, or so I thought. It all began when I was hired to document urban legends around the Midwest for a small production company. The idea was simple: collect strange stories, interview locals, and produce a podcast-style series. Nothing serious. But when I stumbled across the story of the Screaming Tunnel, not the famous one in Canada, but a lesser-known rumor whispered about in Chicago, I knew I had to dig deeper. First, it sounded like a joke. A tunnel beneath an abandoned rail line where, late at night, people claimed to hear a child scream. Some said it was the ghost of a girl who died in a fire. Others claimed it was something older, something that wasn't human at all. I told myself it was just another campfire story, but I couldn't let it go. The first time I went down there, I didn't even bring my recorder. It was winter, the kind of Chicago night where the cold gets inside your bones and you can see your breath hanging like smoke. I climbed down a crumbling concrete embankment and found the entrance. The tunnel was old stone and brick, maybe from the 1920s. Graffiti covered the walls. Shattered bottles crunched beneath my boots. The darkness stretched forever. And then I heard it. Not loud, not at first. Just a faint echo, like someone screaming in the distance. My heart froze. I held my breath, straining to listen. Then it came again, high-pitched, desperate, unmistakably a child's scream. I bolted. I didn't care how stupid I looked, scrambling up the slope, tearing my jacket on rusted metal. When I reached the streetlight above, I swore to myself I'd never go back. But of course I did. The company loved the story. They wanted me to record interviews, gather evidence, maybe even spend a night inside. I laughed it off on the call, told them sure, sounds fun. But deep down I already knew I'd say yes. Curiosity has always been my weakness. So I started with the neighborhood. I found an old man named Harold who'd lived near the tracks his entire life. His tiny living room smelled like tobacco and dust. He told me, in a voice that trembled with age, that when he was a boy, they dared each other to run through the tunnel at night. "None of us made it all the way," he said, staring at his hands. "Always halfway through, we heard it. That scream, like it was right behind you. We'd run for our lives." I asked him if he thought it was a ghost. His eyes lifted, cloudy and fearful. "Son, I don't think it was ever a little girl. That's just the story they tell to make it easier to believe. Whatever's down there, it's older, meaner. It don't want you in its home." His words unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Over the next few weeks, I talked to others. A woman named Marissa told me her brother vanished near the tunnel in the 90s. The police found his backpack, but not him. She swore she still dreamed of him calling her name from the darkness. A younger guy, an urban explorer, claimed he had video footage, though when he showed me it was mostly static and a blur of motion. But in one frame, frozen like an accident, there was a pale figure. Small, childlike, with its mouth open in a silent scream. I asked him if he still went down there. He shook his head violently. "No way, man. I deleted the files. Every time I watched it, weird stuff happened in my apartment. Lights flickering, things moving. I don't mess with that place anymore." I should have walked away right then, but instead I went deeper. The second time I visited the tunnel, I brought my recorder. I forced myself to walk inside, just a few steps. My flashlight beam skimmed over damp stone and graffiti scrawls. Satanic symbols, faces, warnings like, "Don't stay after dark." The air was cold, unnaturally so, colder than the street above. My breath clouded the lens of my recorder as I whispered my notes. And then, the scream came again. This time, it was deafening. A child's shriek, echoing all around me. So loud I dropped the recorder. My flashlight flickered, then went out. I was swallowed by blackness. Somewhere ahead, I heard running footsteps. Light, rapid, like a child fleeing down the stone corridor. I fumbled for the recorder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. And then, from the darkness, I heard a whisper. It was right behind me. Daniel said my name. I stumbled out of the tunnel, gasping, my lungs burning from the cold air. My knees buckled, and I collapsed under the yellow glow of the nearest streetlight. For a long time, I just sat there, shaking, too terrified to move. When I listened back to the recorder later, my blood ran cold. The scream was there, shrill and piercing, but so was the whisper. A child's voice, clear as day, sang my name, and I had never introduced myself inside the tunnel. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the whisper replaying in my head, over and over. At some point, exhaustion won and I drifted off, only to wake at 3 a.m. with the sound of tiny footsteps in my apartment hallway. I live alone. When I crept to the door, the hallway was empty, but the smell hit me, acrid, unmistakable. Smoke, like wood burning. I shut the door, locked it, and didn't move until dawn. The story should have ended there. I should have packed up my things, told the company I was done, and left it alone. But instead, I did what I always do, I chased it. I needed answers, and that's when I learned the truth about the girl. There really had been a fire decades ago not far from the tunnel. A farmhouse had burned to the ground, killing a little girl inside. But the official reports were vague, almost like they didn't want people digging too deeply. When I tracked down an old newspaper clipping, it mentioned something strange. Neighbors reported hearing screams long after the fire was out. They searched the ruins, but found nothing. Some even swore they saw a small figure wandering near the tracks at night. Her hair singed, her face twisted in pain. The deeper I dug, the darker it got. One retired fireman agreed to talk to me. His name was Carter, and he'd been on the scene that night. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, eyes far away. "She wasn't supposed to be there," he muttered. "The fire had already taken the house. We were just putting out hot spots." Then one of the guys swore he saw her, in the smoke, a little girl. But when he ran toward her, she vanished. Just gone. He dragged hard on his cigarette, ash spilling onto his jacket. "You don't get it, son. She wasn't alive when we saw her. We all knew it, but she was screaming, and it wasn't the kind of scream you forget." That's when I realized this wasn't just a ghost story. This was something worse, and I was already in too deep. I couldn't shake the fireman's words. "She wasn't alive when we saw her." The phrase echoed in my head like the tunnels themselves were repeating it back to me. I'd gone into this thinking it was just a ghost story, a creepy local legend, something to boost downloads and give people a scare. But this was different. Every person I talked to, every scrap of evidence I uncovered, it all pointed to something real, something festering in that tunnel. For days I tried to distract myself. I buried myself in editing audio, calling friends, even going out at night just to avoid being alone in my apartment. But it didn't help. The footsteps came back, night after night, always around 3 in the morning. Sometimes I'd hear a faint knock on my bedroom door. Other times it was the sound of coughing, shallow and ragged, like someone inhaling smoke. I never opened the door. I didn't dare. The company pushed me harder, telling me this was gold. They wanted a full on-site recording session, preferably an overnight stay. I lied through my teeth and told them I was already planning it. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I had the guts to set foot in that tunnel again. But deep down, I knew I would. Curiosity is a disease, and I was already infected. Before I went back, I decided to interview a woman named Dolores. She was in her 70s, sharp-eyed despite her age, and she'd lived in the neighborhood when the farmhouse fire happened. She invited me into her kitchen, where the smell of coffee mixed with mothballs and old wood. "You want to know about the girl?" she asked. "Her name was Emily. Sweet little thing. But there was something about her. The kids said she talked to shadows. That she knew things no child should know." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "She'd tell other kids when their pets were going to die. She told a teacher once that her father would never come home from work. And he didn't. He dropped dead of a heart attack that same day." Dolores stirred her coffee slowly, her spoon clinking against the cup. "Some folks said she was cursed. Others said she was chosen. Either way, when that house caught fire, nobody was surprised. Her words chilled me more than the tunnel ever had. A cursed child, a fire, a tunnel filled with screams. I thanked her and left, but the image of a little girl predicting death stayed with me all night. Finally, I gave in. I packed my gear, flashlight, recorder, a couple of cameras, and more batteries than I thought I'd need, and I went back to the tunnel. This time, I wasn't just going for a quick scare. I was going to spend the night. The first hour passed quietly. I set up a small camp chair near the center of the tunnel and kept my recorder running. I spoke into the microphone, narrating everything I felt, every sound I thought I heard. The walls dripped with moisture. My flashlight beam danced over the graffiti. Time crawled. Around midnight, I heard it. The scream, louder than before, echoing until the stone seemed to shake. My body tensed, but I forced myself to stay seated, gripping the recorder like it was a lifeline. My voice cracked as I whispered, "I hear you. What do you want?" The air shifted. The temperature dropped so sharply that my breath turned to fog in front of me. Then came the footsteps, pattering quickly toward me. My flashlight flickered, but this time it didn't go out. And in its beam, I saw her. A little girl no taller than my waist. Her hair was matted, her skin blistered, blackened patches covering her arms. Her eyes were the worst, glassy, wet, staring straight into mine. Her mouth opened, and the scream that tore from her throat was like nothing human. It rattled my bones. I dropped the flashlight, and in that split second of darkness, she was gone. But the sound lingered, echoing down the tunnel, circling me. I stumbled to my feet, heart pounding, ready to bolt. That's when I heard a different voice, softer, almost gentle. "Help me." I froze. It wasn't the scream. It wasn't the whisper. It was a plea, desperate, broken, and it came from deeper inside the tunnel. My instincts screamed at me to run, but something else pushed me forward. Maybe it was the journalist in me, maybe the fool. I picked up the flashlight, aimed it into the darkness, and walked. The tunnel narrowed as I went. The graffiti gave way to bare stone, damp and crumbling. The smell of smoke grew stronger, mixed with something else, rot, sweet and foul. The sound of crying echoed ahead, soft sobs that made my stomach twist. I found a small alcove, a break in the wall where bricks had collapsed. I shone my light inside and nearly dropped it again. There were bones, small, fragile bones, charred black, and among them, a scorched doll with one glass eye missing. The crying stopped. The air was silent, too silent. Then, behind me, a voice whispered, "Now you can't leave." I spun, my flashlight beam shaking wildly across the walls, but there was nothing there. Nothing but darkness. And then the light went out. I can't explain what happened next. I don't have words for it, but I felt hands. Tiny, burning hot hands, grabbing at my arms, my legs, pulling me down. I kicked, I screamed, but they were everywhere. The smell of smoke filled my lungs. My vision blurred. For a moment, I swear I was in the fire with her, choking, burning, dying. When I woke up, I was outside, lying on the ground by the embankment, gasping for air. My gear was gone. My recorder, my cameras, even my flashlight vanished. Only the chair remained, folded neatly at the mouth of the tunnel. I stumbled home in shock, my skin singed with small burns I couldn't explain. No one believed me when I told them. Not the company, not my friends. They thought I staged it or I'd lost my equipment to some vandals. But I knew better. I knew I'd barely escaped. And yet, the story wasn't done with me. The days after that night blurred together. I tried to convince myself it was a nightmare brought on by exhaustion and nerves. But every time I looked at the burns on my arms, I knew better. They were real. The doctor said they looked like contact burns, like I'd pressed against a hot stove. But I hadn't. I hadn't touched anything, at least not anything alive. I should have stopped. I should have walked away. But instead, I found myself drawn deeper into the mystery. I couldn't escape it. My dreams were filled with fire and screaming. The little girl's glassy eyes staring at me from the darkness. Every morning, I woke up to the smell of smoke in my apartment. My neighbors never smelled it. Only me. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard laughter. Faint, high-pitched, a child's laugh, drifting from the kitchen. I forced myself to look. My apartment was empty, but the doll, the same scorched doll I had seen in the tunnel, was sitting on my kitchen table. I had never brought it home. My hands shook so badly I dropped my phone trying to take a picture. When I looked up again, the doll was gone. That was the night I called Marissa again, the woman whose brother had vanished near the tunnel. She hesitated at first, but finally agreed to meet me. We sat in a coffee shop and I told her everything. She listened, pale and silent, until I finished. "My brother used to talk about her," she whispered, "before he disappeared. He said she came to him in dreams, told him things. He said she wanted him to stay with her in the tunnel, that he'd never be alone again. He started to change. He barely ate. He was always tired. The night he vanished, he told me he was going to see her. I never saw him again." Her voice broke, and she covered her face. "She doesn't want to be alone. That's what scares me. She takes people." Her words clung to me like the smell of smoke. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I sat awake, recorder running, whispering my thoughts into the mic like it was my only anchor. Around 3 a.m., I heard the footsteps again. Those light, rapid taps on the floorboards. But this time, they didn't stop at the hallway. They came into my room. I held my breath, refusing to look. The air grew hot, suffocating, as if flames were closing in. Then, just beside my bed, a small voice whispered, "Stay with me." My body froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. For a moment, I thought I felt the mattress dip, as though something had climbed onto it. When I finally jerked the lamp on, the room was empty. But on the nightstand, resting neatly beside my recorder, was the doll. Its one glass eye stared at me, unblinking. That was when I realized I couldn't ignore her anymore. She wasn't just in the tunnel. She was in me, in my life. And the only way to end it was to go back. I started planning carefully. I wanted evidence, undeniable proof. I borrowed high-grade equipment from a friend in the paranormal community: infrared cameras, EMF detectors, motion sensors. I told myself that if I could capture her on film, if I could show the world, then maybe I could break free of her grip. The night I returned, I brought 2 people with me, Kyle and Renee, both seasoned ghost hunters. They were skeptical but intrigued by my story. We set up our gear inside the tunnel, lining the walls with small LED lights, placing motion sensors at each end, and positioning cameras to cover every angle. At first, nothing happened. For nearly 2 hours, we sat in the damp cold, listening to the drip of water and the occasional rumble of a distant train. Kyle cracked jokes to pass the time. Renee checked her monitors. I sat rigid, waiting, my stomach knotted with dread. Then, at exactly 3:07 a.m., every light went out at once. Total darkness swallowed us. Renee cursed under her breath, fumbling with her flashlight. Before she could switch it on, the scream came. It wasn't distant this time. It was right there with us, ear-splitting, raw, a child's voice shrieking until I thought my eardrums would burst. Kyle shouted, but his voice was drowned out. The air grew thick with smoke, choking us. And then we saw her. Emily stood in the center of the tunnel, illuminated by some light that didn't come from us. Her skin blistered, her hair singed, her eyes reflecting like glass. She lifted her arms, and the walls of the tunnel seemed to ripple like heat waves. Flames licked across the stone, though nothing burned. Renee screamed, dropping her monitor. Kyle tried to run, but something yanked him backward, hard. He slammed into the wall with a sickening thud and collapsed. I rushed to him, but Emily's voice filled the tunnel, echoing from every direction. "Stay with me, forever." Her figure flickered, breaking apart like smoke, then reforming. Dozens of hands, small and charred, clawed their way out of the walls, reaching for us. One latched onto my wrist, burning my skin. I howled in pain, ripping free. Renee bolted for the exit, but the tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, her flashlight beam never reaching the end. I grabbed Kyle, dragging him to his feet, and screamed at Renee to keep running. The smoke thickened, the fire roared, and all I could hear was Emily's shriek, louder than anything human. Somehow we made it out. I don't remember how. One moment we were drowning in fire and darkness, and the next we were sprawled on the grass outside, coughing, gasping, shaking. Renee's hair was singed. Kyle's arm hung at a strange angle, broken from the impact with the wall, and my wrist bore deep, blackened handprints burned into my skin. The equipment was gone. Every camera, every monitor, every recorder vanished. Only our own injuries remained. Renee quit ghost hunting after that night. Kyle never answered my calls again. Couldn't blame them, but for me it wasn't over. It would never be over, because I knew the truth now. Emily wasn't bound to the tunnel. She could follow, and she wanted me. I started seeing her everywhere. In reflections on bus windows, in the corner of my vision at grocery stores, even in photographs where she shouldn't be. The doll appeared in my apartment no matter how many times I threw it away. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I woke to find it sitting on my chest, its single glass eye inches from my face. I was unraveling, and yet a part of me understood. She didn't want to haunt me. She wanted me to join her, to be one more lost soul screaming in the darkness of that tunnel. And I was terrified I might give in. They say fear rewires the mind. I don't know if that's true, but I know what it did to me. It focused everything. Every breath, every thought, narrowed to one clear, painful point. Stop her. I had to stop Emily before she took anyone else. That decision led me to a terrible place. I started by going back through everything I had gathered. The clippings, the interviews, the charred doll, the burned marks on my skin. I read the old newspapers until my eyes blurred and replayed the recordings until the whispers in the margins sounded like instructions. There was a pattern, small details everyone had thought irrelevant. A neighbor's offhand note about a woman who left town the week after the fire. A priest's hurried visit that no one remembered. A scrap of a ledger with a name crossed out. Hargrove, 1947. I tracked down Hargrove. He'd been a name in a city ledger, a contractor who repaired things after fires. The building he'd owned was gone now, replaced by glass and steel. But his family lived on 2 blocks from where I grew up. An elderly woman answered the door. Her face was a map of sun and sorrow. "You Daniel?" she asked, as if she'd been expecting me. I showed her the clipping, Emily, the fire, the screaming. Her eyes went black with something like pity. "We never talked about that," she said quietly. "My grandfather did things. He thought he could fix what the fire broke. He tried to." Her hands trembled. "He put things in the walls. Strange charms. Worrying things meant to trap the bad. But when you trap something, it doesn't leave. It waits." Was Emily? Was she trapped? I asked. The answer came with the sort of certainty that leaves no room for hope. "She was looking for what was lost," she said, and closed the door. That night, when I lay awake, the word trap echoed in my head. I thought of the alcove full of bones, of the scorched doll, of the hands reaching from the stone. Hargrove's family had built something into the tunnel walls, some superstition scaffold that on the surface was meant to stop evil, but it had made a prison instead. Emily's wailing was not a call for company. It was an ache for release. But a release of what? The dead? The living? I didn't know. All I knew was that whatever solution the contractor had tried, it had failed. Worse, it had tied Emily to the place like a wound to a body. I couldn't go to the police. The people I'd told shrugged it off as a hoax, a prank, or a sickness. The company wanted sensational audio, not a man with burn marks and nightmares. So I did what the obsessed do. I acted alone. I gathered what few clues I had and started to dismantle the trap. I returned to the tunnel one last time with a single plan: to free her or to end her. There was a consolation in framing it as a choice, rescue or obliterate, because it gave me agency. Either way, I would not be a victim anymore. The night was the kind that made the city seem thin, like the veil between what's real and what's imagined had been stretched too tight. My breath fogged in front of me. I carried a crowbar, the remaining pieces of the doll wrapped in cloth, a handful of coins I'd found in Hargrove's ledger tucked into my jacket. I had no right to call these things tools, but they felt like rituals. Practical items dressed in desperate superstition. Inside, the tunnel was a living thing. The stones hummed. The same chill that had followed me for months shivered across my neck. I walked until the alcove with the collapsed bricks came into view. The charred bones lay where I'd left them, small and brittle, dusted like the ghosts of lighter days. I pried at the mortar with shaking hands, crowbar biting into the old composition. As I worked, the air thickened. The smell of smoke wrapped around me like fingers. She appeared, as if summoned by the scrape of metal. Emily stood a few feet away, the same as before, but softer now, less defined. Her mouth was closed. Her eyes, those terrible glass pools, looked straight into mine. She didn't scream. She tilted her head the way a person does when puzzled by a stranger. "Why are you here?" she asked in the voice of a child. For a second, everything faltered. All the rage, the fear, the need to end this. It tangled into a silence I had no name for. I thought of Marissa's brother, of Kyle and Renee, and how they had fled. I thought of the way the smoke invaded my apartment and the doll that had appeared by my bed. I thought of Carter, the fireman, who had said the scream was impossible to forget. "Because you can't be like this," I said. My voice sounded foreign in my own ears. She took a step closer. The air warmed. The stone around us seemed to breathe. "You leave," she said evenly. "They leave." She touched the wall with a small blackened hand. The mortar trembled, and then, with the sound of dozens of tiny doors opening, the tunnel around us shifted. Hands, dry, bone-dark, some still holding bits of char, some almost translucent, poured out of the stone. They crowded around my feet, grasping, begging, hungry for warmth. They weren't all the girls. They were a tangle of the taken. People who had vanished over decades, folded into this place like a pattern in fabric. "The trap took them," Emily said softly. "They wanted to be found. We kept them. Now they want others." A truth fell into place like a loose brick. Hargrove's charm had not bound one child. It had bound many, and the screams were a chorus, layered and soaring. Emily was the loudest voice, the one that had learned to imitate the others. She had learned to call names, to imitate flesh, because that is how a thing trapped learns to survive, by mimicking what it desires. "What do you want?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. "Stay," she said. "Be warm. Tell stories. Be the light." And then the hands reached for me. I fought. I screamed and used the crowbar not to pry brick but to hit the reaching hands until my arms hurt and the sound of wood on bone filled my ears. For a dizzying moment, I thought I could wrench free the structure from its hold, tear apart the mortar that held the dead. But the more I struck, the deeper the hands sank, as if the more violence I offered, the more tightly the prison closed. Despair is a mirror. It shows you all the ways you can fail. Yet in the reflection I also saw one final measure, ridiculous and terrible and somehow only partially my own. If the trap could keep them, perhaps it could keep one more. If I could choose a sacrifice, a human bargaining chip, would that close the wound and let the others go? The thought made bile rise in my throat. The choice made me into a sort of mad saint, a person willing to trade himself for strangers whose names he had never learned. "You want me to stay?" I asked, teeth grinding. Emily nodded, the movement slow, solemn. "Stay with us." I could have said no. I could have run. Instead, I found my voice and spoke the thing truthfully. "I won't hurt anyone else. I laid down the crowbar. The hands paused, like a crowd listening to a verdict. Slowly, I climbed into the alcove, feeling the rim of stone bite into my shoulders. I wrapped the doll in my jacket and held it to my chest, as if that could be a vessel for the bargain. The hands curled around me. They were not all violent. Some stroked my hair like thankful children. Some tugged and bit and left blood on my skin. The world became a confined chamber of heat and shadow and memory. I thought of the people I loved. Small lights I had refused to name for fear of shame, and I thought of Marissa, still waiting for a brother who would never come. I thought of Harold, his hands folded, still warning about the mean thing in the tunnel. The last sensory things before the dark were smell and touch. Smoke and char and the tiny warmth of the scorched doll against my lips. I did not know how long I lay there. Time bent and broke. The city above carried on, oblivious. Trains, diners, neon. Perhaps 1 minute passed. Perhaps 1,000 years. At some point, the pressure lessened. The hands that gripped me loosened. The screaming faded like a song run out. When I came back to myself, I was outside. Not on the embankment this time, but on the sidewalk, the winter morning light thin and gray. My body was sore, and when I reached up to touch my face, my fingers came away blackened. The doll was in my hand, but it looked different. Whole now, its glass eye intact, hair smoothed. The chair I had left at the mouth of the tunnel was gone. People walked by without looking. A dog barked. The city continued like a living thing that had no memory of tragedies that were not printed in headlines. I stumbled home and sat in my empty apartment. For hours, I did nothing but listen to the silence. The footsteps did not return. The smell of smoke did not linger. For the first night in months, I slept through until noon. In the days that followed, reports trickled through. A missing teenage girl's profile closed after a search found nothing. An old man's family said he had vanished 2 towns over with no tracks leading to him. News of a hiker's disappearance in the state parks. None of them were tied together in any official way. They were lost things, strange and scattershot, like torn pages from a book someone had abandoned. When I called Marissa, she cried softly on the phone and told me she had a dream. Her brother smiling, saying he was warm. I didn't tell her anything about bargains or hands, only that maybe he had found peace. Lie by lie, we stitched a fragile ending. Sometimes, at night, I think I hear a faint sound in the distance. Not a scream, but a child singing a single broken line of a lullaby. Other times, the city's rumble swallows even that. The doll sits on my shelf now. Its glass eye catches the light in the morning and makes a small bright point that travels across the wall. I keep it because I cannot bring myself to throw it away, and perhaps because I need proof that what happened was not just the failure of a tired imagination. I tell this story to you in the way survivors tell stories. Messy, honest, and secretive in places where the wound is still raw. I am not a hero. I am not brave. I am a man who made a choice, and some choices are not clean. We keep our losses close and our bargains closer. If you ever find yourself near an old tunnel and the night is very still, and you hear a thin voice calling a name you thought only you knew, look away. Walk toward the light. And if the air smells of smoke where there should be none, remember this: some houses should be left to their ashes, because there are things that do not want company. They want warmth. They want to be kept. And sometimes, if they ask nicely enough, someone will agree to stay. After that, people asked me if I felt lighter, if the weight had lifted. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to feel free of smoke and small hands and the sound of a child calling like a name folded into my bones. Some mornings I did feel lighter. The footprints in my dreams became fainter. The doll stayed on my shelf and would not vanish. My wrist's burns faded into pale, puckered scars. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm. Work, food, the small negotiations of daily survival. I learned to answer the phone without flinching. I learned to sleep through the night more often than not. But freedom is a strange currency. It buys you calm, yes, but it also exacts tolls you don't see until later. Months after that night, a neighbor knocked on my door. A woman from down the hall whose teenage daughter had been painting late in the building's common room. She asked, voice small and hesitant, if I'd like to see something. She led me to her apartment and opened a drawer, revealing a stack of postcards and old photographs. On top, in a shaky hand, was a picture torn from a family album. It showed a group of people on a summer day by a small country house. In the corner of the photograph, half hidden behind the family's picnic basket, a little girl stood with her mouth open as if in mid-squeal. Her hair was short and singed at one side. The woman's daughter had found the photograph at a thrift store and thought it eerie. I looked closer and felt the familiar, bitter pull of recognition. An ache almost musical, it was so clean. The girl's face wasn't Emily's, not exactly. But the expression, the posture, the light in her eye, it echoed what I had seen. The neighbor smiled weakly and said she thought it was spooky and asked if I wanted to keep it. I took it and thanked her and placed it behind a book on my shelf, where it casts a thin long shadow when the morning light hits it. Sometimes I tell myself it's all coincidence. There are a million little coincidences in a city. Old photographs in thrift stores, objects that reappear, faces that mimic one another by chance. The rational part of me takes refuge in that thought and builds a small, tidy house of reason around it. But then, on slow days when the city's noise thins and I have nothing to drown in, I hear the single line of a child's lullaby echo in my mind. Not a full song, just a note that lingers like an ember. People asked if I would ever go back. Legalities aside, there's a more personal reason I haven't. Tunnels are places that keep memories. They are cool and dry and patient. If you rattle them long enough, they'll return whatever you put in. Sometimes they'll return it whole. Sometimes they'll return it with teeth. Going back would be like reopening a wound just to see if it bled again. I have learned to accept my scars as proof enough. There were practical things, too. Flyers taped to lampposts for missing persons that slipped into the same river of news. One more missing teenager here, one more hiker gone there. I read them, close the paper, and wonder if any of those faces will ever look out of old photograph corners. If any of them will show up in thrift store piles as a smiling ghost of summer. The pattern of disappearances that once seemed sparse now looked like a slow, halting heartbeat across the region. An economy of loss that, to my mind, never really stopped. It had only shifted shape. Once, on a midnight walk 2 winters later, I paused at the mouth of a subway entrance near where the rail yard used to be. The city thrummed beneath a sheet of cold air. A woman with a stroller crossed the street and smiled in my direction, friendly in the way strangers in city neighborhoods sometimes are. I watched the light catch her hair, and for a second it looked singed at one side, like a memory of flame caught again in a photograph. My hands went cold, and I turned away. I learned the ways to live with a thing in the world. You name it sometimes so it loses power. You call it a memory, a superstition, a personal failure. You sharpen your boundaries, like the bar's edge of a knife. You do not walk into old tunnels at night. You do not follow voices that call your name in empty rooms. You throw out an object that appears from nowhere, and you watch your back as if gratitude is a dangerous thing that invites further debt. You ask forgiveness from the living and the dead alike, though both give it sparingly. Sometimes I wonder about Emily herself. I found, over time, that pity is an odd companion to fear. She was a child, hurt and furious and small, and she learned to call for company the only way she could. It makes monstrous things of us when survival becomes a desperate craft. In those quiet moments I thought of the charred doll and the ledger with a name crossed out, of Hargrove's family pulling the threads too hard and knotting them into a trap. The human acts that try to fix hurt often make it worse. There is a lesson in that I have not yet learned to forgive myself for. The doll sits on my shelf and gathers dust. Sometimes at night I can feel the subtle warmth of it where my fingers once rested on its cracked vinyl. I do not pretend it is merely an artifact. It is more a ledger, one where we write who we have failed and who we have chosen to let go. People have said to me, "Why keep it?" As if keeping it might be an invitation. I keep it because it is the smallest honest thing I have that proves I did something, however wrong, that night. I keep it because it reminds me to tell the truth about the things we do to each other in the name of salvation. And sometimes, rarely but with precise frequency, I hear my name in a voice not quite right. Not the scream, never again that shriek. It is a whisper that could be the wind or could be remembered breath. When it happens, I close my eyes and steady myself and remember the bargain. I remember the hands, their warmth and their hunger, the way they had begged me to stay. I remember choosing to let them go and the cost of that unfashioned mercy. And I remember that even with a wound bound, a scar remains. If this story serves as anything beyond an account of strange nights and burned hands, let it be a warning, thin, human, and not the kind that belongs in urban legend anthologies. The warning is simple. Do not assume all voices in the dark are illusions. Do not mistake absence for peace. And if you are compelled to chase a story because it promises meaning where there is only broken geometry, prepare to pay with a piece of your life. The city will keep the rest. I tell you this not to frighten you for its own sake, but because stories are maps. They chart places to avoid or pass by more carefully. They also tell us, stubbornly, how we might still find ways to be human, flawed, repentant, and tender in our own sorry, fragile ways. I am not absolved. I carry the doll and the memory as both penance and proof. Sometimes, late at night, the lullaby returns and I hum it back, softer, to remind myself that singing can mean both grief and grace. If you ever hear a child call your name in a place where no child should be, listen once. Then, without drawing a map in your head, walk toward the light and keep walking until you are very far away.